Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 8th meeting of the Beer Evaluation course. This time, we will discuss beer evaluation. Just wanted to remind you that if you like the video, please hit the like button, and if you have any questions, please comment on the video and I will answer. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button and click on the bell icon to get notified when my next videos come out. In addition, if you haven't followed me on my social media, you can see them on the screen changing right now or find them in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's start our presentation of the day about beer evaluation. This is the 8th presentation of the beer evaluation course, and in it we will focus on beer evaluation. This is the layout of this presentation. We will start by discussing beer evaluation, how to evaluate the aroma, appearance, flavor, and mouthfeel. Next, we will move on to talk about how to prepare for a judging session, how to perform an evaluation under a competition setting, and how to prepare beer score sheets in a competition. Let's start by returning to the definition of evaluation. Evaluation is a systematic, structured assessment of something or a determination of merit, worth, or significance against a set of standards. In the BJCP, the evaluation process focuses on capturing accurate sensory perceptions and then comparing them to the style guidelines. At a recreational level, we usually only do the sensory evaluation and skip the comparison to the set of standards. We should also recall the structure of a complete beer evaluation. As we noticed, it is listed in the beer score sheets in the small prompts beneath the titles, so you do not have to remember it by heart. For a full evaluation, you must evaluate each of the things listed on this slide. Now, after discussing beer evaluation in general, let's move to talk about how we should evaluate the beer aroma. To appreciate the aroma of the beer, we will stir the beer in the glass and tilt the glass in our direction. Inhale deep in the glass close to the beer or foam. But be careful, we do not try to evaluate nose feel. Next, stir again, stop stirring and smell again, this time in the direction of the top of the glass, away from the beer. Repeat the stirring, but this time smell in the middle of the previous distances, with a series of short and quick sniffs. Finally, we smell at a distance of 10 to 15 centimeters above the glass while it is vertical. Each of these types of sniffs will highlight different aromas. When we assess aroma, we try to capture as many different aromas as we can feel. Now we will move on to talk about each of the aroma components and start with malt. When we come to evaluate and comment about the malt aroma, we need to ask ourselves a few questions. How strong is it? How potent or concentrated is it? Does it have an aroma of specialty malts? Does it have an aroma of flour, dough, bread, toast, or something else? Caramel, maybe? It's important to remember, malt to beer is like grapes to wine. It is the main ingredient that gives sugars and flavor to the drink. It is impossible to evaluate a beer without appreciating the main ingredient. After evaluating the malt, the second most important ingredient of beer is the hops. When we come to evaluate the aroma of the hops, we ask ourselves again, what is its strength or concentration? Do you feel any aroma of specific variety? Does the hops feel fresh or does it feel old and stale? Do we smell floral, earthy, herbs, spices, dried fruit, or something else? Do the hop give a dank character? After evaluating the hops, we need to evaluate the fermentation flavors. After all, every beer goes through fermentation. We should assess if the yeast added any aroma, or are there aromas that indicate any fermentation problems? If you were told what the strain of yeast is, does it have any specific aroma? For example, in German wheat beers, do you feel the banana clove character? How does the alcohol in the beer make us feel? Is it noticeable? If so, does it add a spicy or sweet aroma, or alternatively, an aggressive or sharp aroma if there are problems? And finally, we will assess the general nature of the fermentation. Was it clean, fresh, or alternatively dirty, yeasty, sulfuric, or something else? If we were told that there are special ingredients in the beer, we must evaluate these as well. These should be noticeable at least at a low level and be harmoniously balanced with the other ingredients in the beer. In sour styles, we need to assess whether acidity is felt in the aroma. Acidity is a taste and not an aroma. So, when something smells acidic to us, we actually feel aromas that we recognize by association as aromas that come with acidity. Acidity in beer that comes from fruit additions or fermentation will be felt in the aroma. If we were told that the brewers used special processes to prepare the beer, then we need to evaluate if they added anything to the beer. For example, if we were told that the beer was aged in wood, we would expect woody, toasty, or vanilla aromas. If the brewer carried out cold distillation, the flavors of the beer will be more concentrated. And finally, we will appreciate the balance, harmony, and pleasantness of the aroma. You should write about whether the different components complement each other or do they conflict. Are they balanced according to the style definitions? And what is your general impression of the beer aroma? There are many ways to organize aroma and flavor descriptors. There are aroma wine wheels that you can order. There are also aroma and flavor maps that you can buy, or you can use an app called DraftLab or Sampleox that allows you to evaluate drinks and contains all of these descriptive words. The common thing for all of these methods of ordering the flavors is that they are arranged in a hierarchy according to families. There are three hierarchy levels in the aroma circle of wine, and there are even up to four levels in the flavor maps. The hierarchy levels group aromas by families. For example, if we look at a specific part of the aroma wheel for wine, we can see that there is a family of herbs and vegetables. This family is divided into three classes: fresh aromas, preserved or cooked aromas, and dry aromas. Within each such class, there are more specific descriptive words. For example, in the fresh aromas department, you can find things like freshly cut grass, green pepper, eucalyptus, and mint. On the other hand, in the category of cooked or preserved aromas, there are green beans, asparagus, green olives, black olives, artichokes, and more. Therefore, when evaluating beer, try to use the most specific descriptive words as you can. Don't say citrus aroma. Say orange, lemon, lime, pomelo, and so on. Don't say herbal aroma. Say rosemary, thyme, chives, peppermint, mint, and so on. Now, after discussing how do we assess the aroma of a beer, let's move on to talk about the appearance of the beer. Let's start with the color of the beer. To assess the color, we need to evaluate the hue. The hue is a color with intensity. The color can be straw, gold, amber, brown, and black. For intensity of color, you can use weak, light, pale, medium, dark, or deep. So, when we refer to the color, we give descriptions like weak or light straw, dark yellow, light or dark gold, deep black, etc. If we are talking about beers with other fruit, more colors can appear depending on the type of fruit, such as pink, salmon, orange, red, ruby, crimson, and purple. It is also worth talking about the saturation and intensity of the color. The saturation indicates the intensity of the shade. For example, scarlet red is a color with saturation compared to normal red. You can use descriptive words like deep or inky for the top range. After the color of the beer, move on to describe its clarity. Is it possible to see through the beer or not? Does the beer let light pass through or does it reflect it? This can also be a good way to assess the condition of the beer, and if we have a lot of haze, it can indicate defects. Descriptive words for beer clarity can be brilliant, bright, clear, dull, cloudy, hazy, turbid, and opaque. And finally, we evaluate the size of the particles in the beer. Are they big? Can you actually see them floating? Or alternatively, are they small and unnoticeable? This means that the haze is homogeneous in the solution. After evaluating the beer's clarity, talk about the carbonation of the beer. Start by estimating the height of the foam head. After the foam head height, assess its color. The color can vary between white, ivory, off-white, or tan. Assess the size of the bubbles and how long the foam head stays, and its texture. The texture can be things like dense, as you see in beers that are infused with nitro, beady when you see relatively large bubbles, or rocky as happens in Belgian beers. Note whether the head of foam left lace on the glass or a cordon. A cordon is when there is a foam ring on the glass. Comment on the rate of which the bubbles appear in the glass if there are bubbles rising from the beer. And finally, characterize the carbonation intensity. After assessing the appearance of the beer, we move on to evaluate the beer flavor. When we taste the beer, we start by taking a small sip into the front of the mouth and swish your tongue through it. Next, take another sip and this time move the tongue from side to side through the beer. If the beer is too cold, you can let it sit on your tongue for a while to warm it up. Take another sip and pass air through it to oxygenate the beer by inhaling through it. Take another sip and swallow to evaluate the aftertaste. After swallowing, close your mouth and exhale through the nose so that the molecules travel through the retronasal cavity. The first thing to evaluate is, of course, the malt. The questions we ask ourselves are, do we perceive a distinct clean malt flavor, or is it muddled and indistinct? Are there any specialty malt character? Is it distinct or generic? How well does the malt flavors blend with each other? What is the intensity of the malt flavors? Is it flowery, bready, toasty, chocolatey, or roasted? Finally, after assessing the different flavors, we must also evaluate the residual sweetness the malts left behind. The sweetness can be described by terms like bone dry, off dry, slightly sweet, moderately high sweetness, very sweet, and cloyingly sweet. Do not mistake sweetness with any fruity flavors the beer may have. Sweetness is only a measure of residual sugar. After evaluating the malt profile, we move on to the secondary ingredient in terms of flavor contribution, the hops. When assessing the hop flavor and bitterness, we ask ourselves the following questions. Do we perceive a distinct, clean hop flavor, or is it muddled and indistinct? What is the intensity, or how strong is the hop's flavor? Does it taste fresh or stale? Does it have any cheese or stinky socks flavor? Is the hops flavor herbal, earthy, spicy, flowery, exotic fruit, or anything else? And finally, how well does the hop flavor blend with the other flavors? After we assess the hops flavor profile, we must assess the other important attribute of hops, which is the level of bitterness. And after we evaluated the malt and the hops, we move on to describe special ingredients or processes. Special ingredients can introduce a whole world of flavors fruits, spices, malt, woods, and more. If there are special ingredients, they should be noticeable and be in harmony with the other ingredients. Special ingredients should not hide the characteristics of the malts and the hops, but rather enhance them. Try to describe the characteristics and strength of each flavor ingredient. Also, it is better to use descriptions that are specific as possible. If you detected cinnamon, don't say spices. And if you detected spices, just say the first spice that comes to mind. The more descriptive you are, the more knowledge you pass on. After assessing the word's ingredients, it's time to assess the fermentation flavors. Take another sip and write down any noticeable flavors that the yeast added. Are there any fermentation faults? If a certain yeast strain was mentioned, does it have specific flavors? Now evaluate alcohol flavors and bitterness that comes from alcohol. Alcohol has no taste, and in most cases, we describe it by the feeling it gives us. It can be warming if it is good, or burning if it is not pleasant. Alcohol increases sweetness, emphasizes acidity, masks aromas, and can cause a burning sensation. Fusel alcohols can add bitterness to beer. Alcohol and bitterness can affect the balance of the beer, so we have to evaluate and comment about them. As with mead, ciders, and wines, good beers have a sneaky quality where alcohol is felt more than it is tasted. After we evaluated the ingredients and fermentation, we evaluate the balance. The balance is relative to the specific beer style and its attributes. It doesn't mean that the sweetness and bitterness or acidity must be at equal levels. Each style has its own balance. For example, a Munich Helles and a German Pils are made from the same ingredients. However, the Munich Helles should be on the sweet side, and the German Pils should be on the balanced or slightly bitter side. But both beers are balanced according to their style. So balance is not an absolute value, but relative to the style of the beer. A sweet beer will require enough bitterness or acidity, or it will feel flabby and unbalanced. Balance essentially describes how well the individual flavor components complement each other in relation to the intended style of the beer. Next, we evaluate the aftertaste. It's the taste that is lingering in our mouth after we've swallowed the beer. You can describe the length of the aftertaste, meaning how long does it take to disappear? Is it short, medium, long, or memorable? What flavors do we feel in the aftertaste? Are they different from the flavors detected during the tasting, or are they the same? Are they pleasant and balanced or unpleasant? Are there things in them that should not be there? Note that the taste perceptions might be influenced by mouthfeel textures. For example, alcohol enhances the perception of sweetness, reinforces acidity, can mask odors, and may cause a burning sensation. Astringency, on the other hand, might add a gritty character, reduce sweetness, and mask bitterness. Bitterness can be confused with astringency. After we assess the aftertaste, we move on to assess the complete beer flavor. We need to assess if there are any components that are strong or weak. Is there any individual component that is overshadowing the beer? Of course, this should be evaluated according to the style. In an IPA, the hops are supposed to overshadow the malts, and in a Doppelbock, the malts should overshadow the rest of the ingredients and processes. Also, evaluate if there is any component that is lacking. For example, if there is no clove flavor in the German Weissbier. Are there flavors of special ingredients that you can feel that are not too dominant? The best beers are not one dimensional. They will have interest and character. They don't have to be complex. Dry, delicate, and restrained beers can be great also. And now, after discussing the flavor evaluation, we move on to evaluate the mouthfeel of the beer. Mouthfeel describes the set of sensations that are not flavor in the mouth when we taste something. This includes the tactile sensations, textures, and other feelings associated with drinking. The first sensation to evaluate is body. Body is a measure of the beer's relative viscosity or its weight on the tongue. The body can be light or thin, medium or heavy, or even full. These are the normal body ranges. A beer can have a lighter or heavier body than this if it has a problem. A very light body will be like water, and a very full body will be viscous, thick, or syrupy. The feeling of body is very dependent on alcohol levels and sweetness. Strong and sweet beers will feel fuller bodied. After we evaluated the body of the beer, we should evaluate the carbonation. Carbonation is basically a measure of the carbon dioxide that is dissolved in the beer. The carbonation can range from still or flat when there is little CO2 to medium carbonated to sparkling or effervescent in highly carbonated beers. High levels of carbonation can be described as live or effervescent, while terms like fizzy and gassy are negative terms that indicate too much carbonation. Bubbly or like champagne can be used as positive terms in beers. After we evaluated the body and the carbonation, we evaluate the feeling of the alcohol. Alcohol in beer should be undetectable, or it can give a warm feeling in high alcohol beers to a burning heat in poorly fermented beers. High alcohols can feel like they increase the body, give more heat, and maybe also bitterness. After the alcohol, we should evaluate the palate sensation of creaminess. Creaminess in the beer is a measure of how smooth the beer feels on the palate. Creaminess ranges between creamy as expected in oatmeal stouts to crisp as expected in German pils. Tannins, astringency, dryness, and puckering of the palate are common descriptions when tannins are present. Tannins should always be evaluated since they can appear in any beer, since they come from the malt husks and hops in most cases. Aging in oak can also add tannins in addition to other flavor components. Common descriptions for astringency can be non astringent, smooth, soft, velvety, slightly rough, moderately astringent, rough, harsh, very rough, coarse, tannic, and highly astringent. After discussing how to perform a complete sensory evaluation of beer, let's talk about the mechanics of beer evaluation under a competition setting. Beer judging is a little different from beer evaluation because, apart from the sensory evaluation, there is also the part of deciding which is the better beer. The basic elements of evaluation are still there, but after we record the detected sensation on a score sheet and give feedback to the brewer on how to improve the beer, we also assign a numerical score to the beer in relation to the style in which it was entered. These numbers will be compared to determine which is the best beer. It is important to remember that the entrants in a competition pay money for the evaluation, feedback, and scoring. So it is your duty to put all your best effort into the judging. Let's start by discussing how we should prepare to judge a flight of beers. In most competitions, judges are assigned to specific tables in advance. To prepare for a flight, go over the styles in the table and talk about their main components with the other judges at the table. When you arrive, go over the list of beers in the flight and decide on the order in which you want to evaluate the beers. Next, go over the order with the steward. In addition, test the serving temperature of the first beer and ask the steward if you can get the beers colder or warmer. Also, don't forget to ask if any beer happens to have a cork and make sure that you have a suitable opener. Finally, check how many beers you have to judge in the flight. If there is a large number of beers, remember to take smaller sips to avoid getting drunk. After discussing on how we should prepare for a flight, let's talk about how you should evaluate a single entry. Start by filling out the upper part of the score sheet with your information and the entry's information. Then, if possible, examine the bottle before serving the beer. Look for things like the fill level, bacterial ring, and how much sediment is in the bottle. Open the bottle and pour between 30 to 100 milliliters for each judge. Pay attention to pouring slowly if there is sediment, so that you do not pour the yeast. After pouring the beer, smell the sample. Use all the sniffing methods discussed in the assessing aroma section for all the beers you judge on the flight and write your impression of the aroma. As I said before, try to be as specific as possible when you describe aromas and flavors, and remember to give strength and intensity to each aroma you detect. After evaluating the aroma, move on to evaluate the appearance of the beer. When you're done with the appearance, smell the beer again and write if anything has changed or if there are any new aromas. Next, Taste the beer and evaluate the flavor and mouthfeel. Talk about all the things we talked about in these parts of the presentation. In the overall impression section, you should write down your general impression of the beer and how it fits the style, and also give a compliment to the brewer. In addition, you have to comment on the drinkability of the beer. Do you want to drink it? Do you come back for another taste, or do you not want to? If you listed defects, give advice for improvement without making assumptions. If you said that there were problems with the balance of the beer, be specific about what aspects of the balance you would like to correct. Finally, pay attention to cleaning the palate between servings with water, unflavored bread, and crackers. A few things to keep in mind when judging a beer. The first thing is to never write any negative comments on a score sheet. When you write something negative, the reader will stop accepting criticism from you. In addition, highlight the good aspects in each beer. Even if it is terrible, look for something good. Try not to be too specific in the feedback and advice for improvement. You don't really know how the beer was made. Now, make sure that all the checkboxes below are marked according to the style, the nature of the process, and how much you enjoyed drinking it. Please note, an experienced judge should be able to write a full evaluation in about 10 minutes. If you take more time, it can upset the other judges who will not want to judge with you in the future. Finally, the most important thing in any beer evaluation is to give a full sensory evaluation. Remember again that you don't know what the brewer did, so at best you're making an educated guess about the beer. After we discussed how to perform an evaluation for a single entry, let's talk about a few things regarding beer evaluation in competitions. New judges tend to give high scores to beers. So, to calibrate the score, always remember that the lowest score that can be given is 13. 13 is the upper part of the problematic beer and usually conveys the message. A beer that is not in style will receive a maximum of 30. Even if it is excellently made and has no flaws, it will receive a maximum of 30 because it is not in the style to which it was entered. Beer that is not in style and does not have any defects will receive a minimum of 20. A beer with one serious problem, such as lack of esters in Belgian beers or English barley wine, will receive a maximum of 25, and the beer with a serious contamination will receive a maximum of 20. After you finish judging and evaluating a beer, you need to reach a consensus with the other judges at the table. If the entrant gets 2 or 3 scores that are very far from each other, it can cause frustration. Most competition organizers require a maximum of 7-point gap between the lowest and highest score, but a 3-point gap is the ideal goal. In most cases, a normal average will be the consensus, but this is not mandatory. Therefore, it is important to reach an agreement with the other judges at the table. This is the end of today's presentation about evaluating beer. I hope that the talk was informative and interesting, and I just want to remind you that if you like the video, please hit the like button to know when the next videos come out. If you have any questions, please write them down in the comments and I will answer. In addition, you can see my social media handles change on the screen right now or find them in the description below. You're welcome to follow me to know when my next projects come out. Thank you for listening. I was Omar Basha, and see you in the next meeting when we will discuss troubleshooting beer.